Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
Twilight was slowly but surely falling on the shinobi village, the village hidden in the foliage, or Konoha as it's also known. The sun had already set behind the horizon, its warm rays unable to warm the cooling earth. Grasshoppers hummed their cheerful song in the grass, and the trills of nightingales could be heard from the treetops. All living things were preparing for sleep, and the streets were practically deserted. A small, fair-haired child, perhaps 8 years old, wandered aimlessly through the streets, constantly looking around and listening. Why was this little child not at home, wandering the dark streets? This boy had no family. More precisely, his parents had died 8 years ago when Konoha was attacked by a terrible beast, the most powerful Bijou, the nine-tailed demon fox. That night, the fourth Hokage, giving his life, used a sealing technique, trapping the beast within the body of Naruto, as the boy was called, and in doing so, became a hero. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, the unfortunate child didn't know he was the fox's new vessel, so he genuinely didn't understand the adult's hostility toward him and tried his best to attract attention, to show that he, too, was worthy. But his attempts to prove himself earned him nothing but further insults and, often, bruises. That night, Naruto decided to get up to mischief again, hoping his new masterpiece would be appreciated. The boy held a small jar of green paint, and his clear blue eyes sparkled with mischief. It was clear he was up to something nasty. Waiting until a passing cloud obscured the moon, the child, smiling slyly, ran down the street, stopping at a small kiosk whose owner was already resting peacefully at home. After glancing around and making sure no one was watching, the blonde dipped his brush in the paint and, sticking out his tongue, diligently began decorating the walls of the kiosk, painting whatever his boundless imagination suggested. The reeds were rustling. YK, the trees were turning, and the night was so warm. YK, it was humming just such a song. 5 Jonin crawled out from behind a house, staggering and stumbling with every step. 3 of them were holding bottles of sake, the contents of which were barely splashing at the very bottom. The Jonin were completely drunk and were now looking for a way to show off. At that moment, Naruto, hearing voices approaching him, decided to run. If only he had stayed put and hidden. Unfortunately, the boy ran, attracting the attention of the drunken ninja, who quickly recognized the street urchin. "Hey guys, isn't this YK the same one? YK, well, isn't this the demon YK?" One of the Jounin asked, pointing at a child running past. "Yes, YK, him. That bastard. Because of that, YK, demon, my little brother died. I'll kill him," the man roared, and, barely moving on his stumbling legs, he headed towards the fleeing boy. The blonde, realizing he'd been spotted and was apparently about to be beaten, leaped onto the roof and from there onto the adjacent street. The boy was a fast runner, and his legs almost always failed him, but today, luck seemed to have turned against the little Jinchuriki. The child failed to notice a protruding stone and, tripping over it, plowed his nose into the dirt. A few seconds later, the same 5 Jonin who'd stumbled upon him after a successful party landed next to Naruto. Without waiting for the boy to rise, the adult placed his foot on his tiny back, pinning the unfortunate child to the ground. The child whined in pain, eliciting joyful laughter from the Jonin. "You demon! YK! Listen here, here! YK! It's time to pay the bills! YK! I haven't forgotten what you did yet!" The Jonin growled menacingly, pressing his foot harder on the frail body. Grabbing the boy by the hair and pulling him to his feet, he punched the child's face with all his might. Tears welled up in the little blonde's eyes, and his entire tiny body trembled with the effort of holding back a cry of pain and not crying. The drunks didn't seem to like this and, surrounding the blonde, began kicking him and shouting threats and insults. Naruto endured as long as he could, but when he was completely exhausted, he burst into loud sobs. The Jonin recoiled in surprise, but quickly recovered. Those few seconds were enough for the little Jinchuriki to crawl away from his tormentors and somehow rise to his feet. Spitting a few clots of blood on the ground, Naruto performed a hand seal with trembling hands, frantically remembering what his academy teacher had said about illusionary clones. Of course, it didn't work. Firstly, because he either skipped most of his classes or slept. And secondly, because they had only learned the cloning technique in theory. They hadn't yet had any practical experience. Realizing that the boy, no matter how hard he tried, wouldn't be able to create even a basic technique, the Jonin's amusement grew even more intense. The men exchanged glances, nodded, and began performing hand seals with incredible speed. Element of fire, element of wind, element of earth, element of lightning, element of water. The men screamed almost simultaneously, making it impossible to make out the names of the techniques. Naruto's eyes widened in horror as the explosive mixture of all 5 elements came at him. The boy threw his hands forward and squeezed his eyes shut. The impact with the techniques was only seconds away. 4, 3, 2, 1. The blond man cringed, already giving up on life, when suddenly the techniques combined and, glowing with unseen colors, swirled around the child. After the haze from the unprecedented combination of techniques cleared, only a small, fair-haired child remained on the street. Naruto, still in a daze, looked around in shock, trying to spot his tormentors, but they were nowhere to be seen. Having calmed down somewhat, the child slid down the wall, burying his head in his scraped knees. Bitter tears rolled down his cheeks, and a single question swirled in his head. Why? Why does everyone hate me and call me a demon? Lost in thought, Naruto carefully rubbed his knees and arms, trying to stop the bleeding and ease the pain. Suddenly, he heard footsteps and, pressing himself against the wall, tried to blend in with the world around him. The footsteps grew louder, and Naruto prayed to all the gods that he wouldn't be noticed. It seemed fate had decided to take pity on the boy this time, and the man passed by without noticing the cowering child. The child, however, scrutinized the man very carefully, rubbing his tear-stained eyes several times, wanting to make sure this was all real. The man who passed by was dressed in a normal Jonin uniform, but over it he wore a snow-white cloak with flames on the edging, and on the back, in large red letters, was the kanji, which meant, Fourth Shadow of Fire, or Fourth Hokage. Yo, your name Hokage? The blonde couldn't suppress a surprised cry, causing the man to turn around. Why your name Hokage? Naruto stammered, stunned, his tear-stained eyes fixed on the man who had turned around. The adult's blue eyes met identical ones, only small and swollen from prolonged tears. An awkward silence fell on the street. The older blonde couldn't understand what kind of parents would allow a small child to wander the streets at night, and the child was baffled as to why the deceased fourth Hokage had suddenly appeared in Konoha. Naruto frowned, trying to force his brain to work and find an explanation for such a strange phenomenon. The explanation came soon enough. Since the fourth Hokage had long since died, he couldn't stand here and look at him, therefore. Hey! Naruto screamed hysterically, pointing his finger at the fourth, who recoiled in surprise and crawling back to the wall, shaking his head from side to side in the hopes of driving away the ghost. Hey! Don't come near me! I won't do it again! I don't want to die! The little blonde boy shouted, shielding himself with his hands in a protective gesture, at the man who had already recovered from the shock and was now approaching him. The Hokage was momentarily confused by the child's statement, but attributed it to some incomprehensible fear and, carefully, so as not to frighten the boy even more, walked up and sat down next to him, thus ending up on the same level with him. Sure, baby, it's okay, it's okay. No one's going to hurt you, much less kill you. It's okay. The blonde whispered, slowly raising his hand to the terrified child. At the very last moment, Naruto pulled back and muttered something completely astonishing and incomprehensible. Be but you. The fourth Hokage is long dead, which means you're a ghost. I don't like ghosts. I'm afraid of them. The boy's tears began to flow with renewed vigor. No kid. I haven't really died yet, and I don't plan to. Here. The man extended his hand to the blonde boy. You can see for yourself that I'm a living person. Naruto responded with a moment of silence, then slowly and cautiously, as if afraid of disappointment and a blow, extended his hand. A small hand touched the adult's, and the boy froze. It was warm. Therefore, the unnamed Hokage wasn't a ghost. Naruto had nothing to fear, nothing to threaten him. The thought that he might have died didn't even cross his little mind, and the little boy smiled joyfully, wiping the tears still running down his cheeks with the sleeve of his torn shirt. By the way, my name is Minato Namikaze. What's yours? I haven't seen you in Konoha before? The blonde asked the boy in a calm, curious voice, giving him a gentle smile. Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, but everyone calls me a demon and constantly beats me or looks at me with disdain. I don't understand why, the kid muttered resentfully, looking away from the surprised face of the fourth with his blue eyes. Is that so? Is that all? Is that why you're in this state? Receiving an affirmative nod from the child, Minato wondered, what did you do to make them treat you like this? Naruto merely shrugged and quietly sobbed, remembering the happy moments of his short life. Well, okay, the fourth said, more to himself than to the boy, and, taking his strange acquaintance by the hand, asked, Can you walk? You need to see a doctor. You're covered in blood. At this innocuous statement, the child's eyes widened, and he shook his head, expressing his disagreement. Minato ignored this and tried to force the child to stand, only to be met with stubborn resistance and sounds resembling suppressed crying. Deciding he would definitely sort out all the oddities surrounding Naruto, the blonde picked up the reluctant child and, slinging him over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, carried him to the hospital. 5 drunk, no longer so drunk, Jonin stared in stupor at the empty space where the small Jinchuriki had once stood, bleeding from numerous cuts and bruises. After the hellish combination of elemental techniques the men had used to exact revenge on the demon, a 5-colored, funnel-shaped glow had appeared around the boy. Now that the light had dissipated and the dust had settled, scarlet chakra hovered in the air in the boy's place, emitting a frenzied wave of bloodlust. Undoubtedly, this chakra belonged to the Kyubi no Yoko, previously imprisoned in the body of a defenseless child. Now that the boy was gone, the bloodthirsty demon was unfettered, and with each passing minute, it gradually assumed its normal form as a gigantic 9-tailed fox. What have we done? This boy was holding back the 9-tails, and we killed him. One of the Jonin who had participated in the demon exorcism screamed in horror. Finally, the fox fully recovered and, with a satisfied roar, brought all 4 paws down on Konoha, destroying buildings and stomping on the street where drunken Jonin had been partying 5 minutes earlier. All that remained of the bad guys were blood smeared on the ground and pieces of torn uniforms. Panic erupted in the village, just like 8 years ago. It was impossible to tell an adult from a child, a dead person from a living one. People, like ants in the rain, rushed out into the streets, crying, trying to find their children among the fleeing crowd, dodging the collapsing walls of buildings. All around, one could hear children's cries, screams for help, and endless questions. What happened to the Jinchuriki? Has he gone mad? No. He's gone missing. The boy is nowhere to be seen. The 4th Hokage is dead. Who will stop the demon now? What will happen now? What should I do? Damn it. You should have protected the boy, not been angry with him. Naruto. I'm sorry. Please come back. Yes, people never appreciate what they have, but as soon as it disappears, they start crying, asking for forgiveness, and begging for it to come back. But the boy will not return to this world. He has ended up in a place very different from this one, and he does not want to relive all those horrors. In Konoha, where Naruto was transported, and where the fourth lives. Minato Namikaze sat on a small chair next to the bed where the little foundling lay sweetly snoring. On the way to the hospital, the boy, exhausted from the events of the difficult night and warmed by Minato's shoulder, stopped resisting and drifted off to sleep, allowing the medics to properly examine him and administer first aid. The unfortunate child had 3 broken ribs, a bruised kidney, a sprained ankle, and multiple hematomas all over his tiny body. Konoha doctors had never seen such injuries in an 8-year-old child before. Now little Naruto was resting in a hospital room, and forward line trailing from his arm, and bandages covering almost his entire body. Minato Namikaze sat next to the boy, his eyes glued to him. The child seemed so beaten down, helpless, and in appearance, he strongly resembled Namikaze. The fourth Hokage carefully examined the blonde, and all sorts of thoughts were now spinning in his head. Could this unfortunate kid be a spy for another village? Reason told him that anything was possible, but Minato flatly refused to believe it. Why did the child call himself Uzumaki? After all, this clan was exterminated long ago, and only Kushina, the Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed and Minato's wife, had the honor of bearing this surname. What did the kid mean when he said that everyone hates him, beats him, and calls him a demon? What bastards inflicted such injuries on an 8-year-old child, and how could the kid even move in such a state if he was not a spy? Which Minato was sure of with all his heart. Then why had he, Minato, never seen him in Konoha? And finally, why the hell was the kid afraid of him and called him a ghost? Namikaze's head was currently overflowing with questions and no answers. But he wouldn't be the fourth Hokage if he couldn't find an explanation for everything that had happened. Ultimately, the most important thing right now was for Naruto to recover, and then he could question the child and, having discovered something important and interesting, find answers to countless questions. The fourth Hokage's mind was now filled with questions and no answers. He sighed and looked at the sleeping boy for the 100th time, pressing his fingers to his temples, trying to force his brain to work and finally explain this string of incomprehensible phenomena. Why demon? Why ghost? Why Uzumaki? Wait, really? Why Uzumaki? As far as Minato remembered, this entire powerful clan, based on sealing techniques, had been wiped out almost immediately after Kushina had moved, or rather, been forced to move, to Konoha. And if the blonde's memory served him correctly, the clan's distinguishing feature was their red, cherry red hair. But this boy was blonde, so what? Did that mean the child was lying? Minato wasn't sure. The blonde's train of thought was interrupted by the creak of the door opening. Turning his head, Namikaze saw a young nurse shifting unsteadily from foot to foot. Sorry, Hokage-sama, but visiting hours are over. Could you please leave the room? A little? The girl asked hesitantly, for which she received a gentle, slightly sad smile from the blonde. Okay, I'll be leaving now, Minato said, reluctantly rising from his chair and heading for the door. Oh, and before I forget, tell the head doctor to take the boy's blood to check for Uzumaki clan genes. My wife will be there as soon as she can. HM? Uh-huh. The nurse nodded and, casting a shy glance at the Hokage, headed towards the next room. Tadaima! I'm home, Minato shouted, crossing the threshold of the small mansion and closing the door behind him. The next second, he felt an incredibly dark aura and a thirst for blood. Ducking, the blonde dodged a frying pan flying at the very last moment, coming at him at the speed of sound. The aluminum kitchen utensil hit the steel door hard and, with a soft creaking sound, fell to the floor. Damn it! I was so preoccupied with Naruto that I completely forgot to warn Kushina I'd be back late. Closer to morning, anyway. Panicked thoughts flashed through the blonde's head. Namikaze! Came an angry roar, and a furious, crimson-haired girl emerged from the kitchen. Her long hair stood on end and swayed menacingly. Her eyes flashed, and her hand clutched another frying pan. The blonde swallowed nervously, realizing his wife was unlikely to listen to his explanations. She'd probably just kill him. No big deal. Kushina, hello, dear. The Hokage put his hands forward, hoping to somehow protect himself and stay alive. Where have you been all night? Have you looked at your watch lately? The scarlet-haired girl gripped the handle of the frying pan, making it clear that if Minato didn't find a good reason, his life, so full of colors and exciting moments, would be cut short forever. Sweetheart, I'll explain everything. The Hokage smiled nervously. You see, I was just walking home, but in one of the alleys, an 8-year-old boy I'd never seen before called out to me. The little boy was covered in blood and crying uncontrollably. When I approached him, and he told his wife the whole story, starting with how he met Naruto and ending with his request to go to the hospital and give blood for comparison. Kushina, whose anger had vanished completely, and whose face now showed only surprise and curiosity, nodded understandingly and smiled. Okay, I'll go to the clinic tomorrow, or rather today. But first, you'll go to the kitchen and eat, and then we'll go to bed. She yawned sweetly and rubbed her eyes. There's only an hour left until dawn. I need to at least get some sleep. The girl adjusted her nightgown and, beckoning her husband to follow her, headed to the kitchen, where a pot of food stood, covered with a lid and wrapped in all sorts of towels, awaiting Minato's return. Sometime later. Delicious. Thank you, my dear, you're the best. The fourth Hokage smiled contentedly after finishing his meal. His wife said nothing. Kushina, her head propped up on her hand and her elbows on the table, was snoring sweetly, her eyes closed. She's so exhausted today. She was still waiting for me, worried. I wonder if she even ate anything. Minato gently kissed his wife on the forehead and, picking her up in his arms, went to the bedroom with a gentle, loving smile. Yo! Tsunade-sama! The scarlet-haired girl greeted, raising her hand joyfully and smiling from ear to ear as she entered the head doctor's office. Yo, Kushina! You finally came, knowing your hatred of needles. That's quite surprising, said the buxom blonde in a white coat, grinning. Besides being the head physician at Konoha Hospital, she was also the personal doctor of the fourth Hokage's family. BRRR. Don't remind me why I'm here, Tsunade-sama. The girl shuddered and smiled. Even though I hate these kinds of procedures, Minato asked me to do it, and I simply can't refuse him. Besides, if this boy Minato told me about really isn't Uzumaki, it will solve many of the lingering problems. You mean the Ninetales? The blonde inquired, and, receiving an affirmative nod from her patient, sighed. He's still just a child. Wouldn't that be too cruel? Even you were older then. Well, that's true, the girl said hesitantly, but quickly recovered. Because the boys in our clan were such cowards and only put the seal on girls, every time it was time to give birth, the nine-tailed fox would try to escape. I don't want Konoha to suffer, so I'm looking for someone I can trust with this power, so I don't have to worry about giving birth, Kushina said, and added very quietly. Minato and I, we really want a child, but because of this thing inside me, we're afraid to do it. The fox won't miss an opportunity to escape, and there's no guarantee Minato will be able to contain it. So you decided to use an innocent child as a vessel? The doctor asked, raising an eyebrow. I don't know. I don't want to make a child like myself, but I also want to finally become a mother. Minato and I will never abandon this boy, in any case. I know what it's like to be a demon carrier. At the end of her explanation, Kushina's voice trembled, and she covered her face with her hands. Well, in any case, we don't yet know if the boy is Uzumaki. Okay, give me your hand, the blonde demanded with a smile, taking a syringe, a tourniquet, and alcohol from the nightstand. Kushina turned pale and, squeezing her eyes shut, just like she had long ago as a child, extended her hand. A few minutes later. See, it doesn't hurt at all, and you were so scared. A good-natured laugh came from behind the opening door. The fourth Hokage's wife emerged from the head doctor's office, smiling and clutching a cotton pad resting on her vein. "Ha ha, I'll probably never get used to this. I've donated blood so many times, and the fear of pain never goes away." Kushina laughed and, thanking Tsunade for her work, headed to room number 311, where, as Tsunade had informed her, that very Naruto was supposed to be. 308, 309, 310, and here is room number 311, let's see. Namikaze carefully opened the door and saw an empty room. HM? That's odd. I'm sure Tsunade-sama said number 311, right? Where is this Naruto then? Kushina said in surprise, walking into the room in search of the boy. Then she noticed the window was slightly open and, wondering where the injured 8-year-old could have gone, she peered outside. The next moment, Kushina felt some kind of liquid on her hand and brought it to her face to examine a small, scarlet drop that looked suspiciously like blood. "Oh no! Tsunade-sama." The scarlet-haired girl hurriedly ran out of the room, hoping that it was not too late. "Naruto!" The door to the room opened slightly, and a pretty young woman with ankle-length scarlet hair appeared on the threshold. "That's strange. Where is that boy?" she said in surprise, looking around the empty room. Then she noticed the window was slightly open and, wondering where the injured 8-year-old child could have gone, she leaned against the windowsill and peered outside. The next moment, Kushina felt her palm touch something wet, sticky, and slightly warm. Raising her hand, the fourth Hokage's wife spotted a small red stain on her palm, suspiciously resembling blood. Carefully examining the small room where the boy should have been, she discovered several more bloodstains leading from the bed to the windowsill. Her mind told her there were two possibilities. Someone desperately needed the child Minato had found, or the boy had gotten upset/scared/ needed to go somewhere and had fled the hospital. According to Tsunade, in such a state, the child wouldn't even be able to move normally for a long time, so escaping was out of the question. "Tsunade-sama." The scarlet-haired girl hurried out of the room, hoping it wasn't too late. A small, fair-haired child, apparently 7 or 8 years old, leaned against the walls of buildings and clutched his chest, shuffling unsteadily through the back streets, where the sunlight barely penetrated. Naruto knew perfectly well that if he encountered any of the adults, who particularly hated him, he would end up back in the hospital if he didn't die. The blonde sighed softly and tightened his fingers on the bloody bandages on his chest, trying to stop the bleeding from the open wound. Naruto's POV. I opened my eyes and didn't immediately realize where I was. What the hell had happened to me this time? The last thing I remembered was the fourth Hokage throwing me over his shoulder and carrying me to the hospital, where I'm apparently now. But wait, the fourth Hokage? How? He died. How many? 8 years ago. Shit, what happened? Okay, Naruto, calm down and remember what happened last night. Well, I decided to play a little joke on the souvenir seller, because the day before yesterday, when I was looking at animal masks, he pushed me, yelled at me, called me a demon, and threw a fox mask at me. Yeah, that was so offensive. I didn't do anything, I was just looking. Deciding to annoy him a little and damage his shop a little, I got out a can of blue-green paint and, waiting until nightfall, started painting his shop. Haha, it would be hilarious to see his reaction in the morning. True, after this, I'll most likely be taken back to Old Man 3, but at least these adults will remember me for a long time and maybe stop picking on me. Okay, I was lost in thought. I was almost done with my harmless prank when suddenly 5 drunken men crawled around the corner. They staggered and sang a song about some reeds, I think. Deciding not to catch their eye, I ran home. Unfortunately for me, these adults noticed me and, throwing out the now familiar demon, ran after me. Jumping from one rooftop to another, I slipped and fell to the ground. Painful. These men were in front of me in an instant, breathing the reek of alcohol and shouting all sorts of curses and insults at me, pinning me to the ground with their feet and kicking me. I'd become accustomed to this kind of treatment and learned not to scream, despite the excruciating pain. However, these adults were particularly cruel, and I couldn't suppress my cries of pain, causing them to laugh joyfully. While they were distracted, I tried to escape, but they quickly surrounded me and began performing hand seals. Stop! They wanted to kill me with a combination of elemental techniques, but instead of pain, I saw a white light that soon sparkled with all the colors of the rainbow. How beautiful it was, so many colors. When the technique wore off, the men were gone, but the fourth Hokage walked past, as if he hadn't died. I remember I couldn't help but cry out, to which he turned and approached me. I don't remember what exactly he asked me, but he ended up picking me up and carrying me, as he said, to the Konoha hospital. Well, now everything falls into place. Those Jonin simply used some kind of jinjutsu. They probably hoped the fourth would kill me, or that I'd go crazy and be killed. In any case, everything that happened was a lie. I'm still Uzumaki Naruto, I still live in Konoha, the fourth Hokage is still dead, and my home village still hates me. Well, maybe except for old third, Irika-sensei, the ramen vendor, old Tucci, and his daughter, I am. Oh, since I was under Jinjutsu, that means my body was lying on the street, and someone decided to take me to the hospital. Thanks to that person, of course, but I can't stand the smell of medicine, injections, and this stupid hospital gown that always tries to come apart in the most delicate places. So leaving the hospital unnoticed won't work, so I'll have to escape through the window. No sooner said than done. I unhooked the four from my arm and, somehow getting to my feet, wandered to the window. Unfortunately, as I was trying to get out of bed, the wound on my chest opened up and the bandages turned red. Deciding not to waste any time, as all my injuries heal like a dog, I climbed out the window and ran, or rather trudged, to my favorite dorm. NPOV Naruto. Minato sat in his office, staring at the stack of reports and various documents piling up on his desk. This was one of the biggest downsides of being Hokage, as the mountains of reports grew daily, making it impossible to clear them all in a single day. Minato sighed and, having spoken his mind to the mountain of paperwork, made a seal. A lazy pop sounded, and 3 more Minatos appeared in the Hokage's office. The clones glared at the original with genuine hatred and, muttering something under their breath about labor exploitation, began sorting through mountains of paperwork. Minato grinned triumphantly and closed his eyes, putting his feet up on the desk. A few minutes later, the door to the Hokage's office opened without knocking, and the same young nurse, who had asked him to leave Naruto's room, appeared in the doorway. "Hokage-sama!" the girl cried out excitedly, and Minato managed to assume the appearance of a working man at the last moment. "Hokage-sama! The boy you brought to the hospital yesterday, he's disappeared." "What do you mean, he disappeared?" The blonde slammed his palm on the table, startling the nurse greatly, as seeing the fourth Hokage angry or irritated was very rare and, as a rule, did not bode well. "WL, your wife came to the hospital to donate blood, and afterwards she decided to peek into the boy's room, but when she opened the door, there was no one in the room, and there were small drops of blood on the floor. Most likely, the little one opened up one of his many wounds," the girl rattled off, not wanting to anger the Hokage even more. Minato tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Oh my god! Okay, I'll send someone to look, and you tell Tsunade not to delay the test. They did take Naruto's blood, right?" Namikaze ordered, receiving a nod from the nurse and, releasing the girl, looked out the window. "Naruto, who are you?" Minato thought and, having instructed the shadow clones to continue sorting through the reports, disappeared from the office in a yellow flash. Naruto approached the dorm and stopped at the door to his small room. Sighing, he pulled the handle and was surprised when the door didn't budge. He almost never bothered to lock it, leaving it open. So this unexpected occurrence somewhat surprised the blonde. "Strange," the boy thought and walked around the dorm, emerging onto a tiny balcony from which the apartment could be easily entered. The little boy quickly climbed the balcony railing and pushed the door inside. The sight that met his eyes stunned the little blonde. The room was spotlessly clean, not a single empty ramen can or sour milk, but that wasn't what surprised him so much. The room was filled with various furniture and a television, both of which Naruto had never owned. Blue eyes widened in shock, then fixed their gaze on the mirror next to the dresser. Naruto was completely at a loss, as the 6 familiar stripes that had adorned his cheeks since birth were gone. While the little boy stood stunned in the middle of the room, staring at his reflection in the mirror, a busted woman appeared in the doorway, clearly fresh from the shower, as towels adorned her body and hair. A minute of tense silence. Hey, who are you, and what are you doing here? The lady screamed, throwing a comb at the frightened child. Sorry, ma'am, but I actually live here. Naruto yelled back, dodging various projectiles, which only angered the woman further. I live here. The lady got furious, picking up a broom and throwing Naruto out into the street. Finding himself outside his home, the boy blinked in confusion and crouched down, resting his head on his knees. Confusion soon gave way to righteous anger, for this small room was the only place Naruto could feel safe. Now some woman. She decided to take the last thing from him. This is my room, and I won't give it to you, auntie. Get out of there. Naruto shouted at the top of his lungs, attracting the attention of passers-by. The woman's reaction was instantaneous, and within seconds the balcony door opened, revealing a lady red with anger. This is my apartment. I live here. Understand? She yelled menacingly, clutching the rolling pin pointedly in her hands. And if you start making trouble, I'll tell Master Hokage everything. Then we'll see. I don't think your parents will like this. Naruto flinched as it struck, for everyone in Konoha knew he was an orphan. However, the boy quickly recovered and, holding back the tears of pain welling up in his eyes, confidently stamped his foot. Go ahead. Old Man 3 will definitely back me up. The woman blinked in surprise at the boy's statement, then looked at the little boy with apprehension. Hey kid, you didn't escape from a mental hospital by any chance, did you? What time period are you living in? How many years has the 4th been ruling Konoha? You're the one who escaped from the hospital. The 4th died 8 years ago, and now the 3rd Hokage is back. Naruto returned the favor. But his voice had lost its former confidence. The silhouette of the dead Hokage flashed before the boy's eyes once again, his gentle eyes, and the voice promising that everything would be all right. Wasn't this an illusion, or what? Naruto bit his lip nervously, thinking about the latest developments. Naruto! A slightly angry voice called out to him, and the boy turned to see Minato jumping across the rooftops towards him. Minato's POV. Excuse me, have you seen a 7 or 8-year-old kid with golden hair and blue eyes? Was he still covered in bandages and wearing a hospital gown? No? Okay, sorry to bother you. Damn it, Naruto, where did you go? I've already questioned almost half of Konoha's inhabitants, and no one has seen you. I don't want to think you're a spy or that you've been kidnapped, since you don't look like the former, and as for the latter, the best shinobi sensors are stationed around Konoha's perimeter, and they simply couldn't help but notice suspicious faces. So where are you? Did you hear that boy who came into the dorm and told Madame Rose this was his apartment? I heard a girl whisper, gossiping with a friend. Now that was interesting. Seriously? This has been going on for 5 minutes, and no one knows who's going to win. I didn't bother listening to the rest of the conversation and simply ran to the nearest dorm, promising myself to stamp the kid with a God of Thunder seal. As I approached the dorm, I heard loud, yet incomprehensible, voices arguing heatedly. Then the childish voice faded, and a deathly silence fell on the street. I ran faster and finally saw the whole scene with my own eyes. An elderly lady stood on the 2nd floor balcony of the dorm, waving a rolling pin. Naruto stood beneath the balcony, arms crossed, a disgruntled but slightly confused expression on his face, and a small group of onlookers had gathered around the dorm. Naruto! I shouted, feeling myself getting angry. My voice must have sounded threatening, because the boy flinched and looked at me with a frightened expression. In Minato's POV, Naruto nervously turned toward the voice to see the fourth Hokage looking slightly annoyed. However, his anger was clear as day. He'd taken Naruto to the hospital, meaning he wanted him to stay there. Naruto, waking up and chalking it all up to a stupid illusion, had escaped the hospital, practically disobeying the Hokage's direct orders. No wonder he was angry now. The kid closed his eyes and curled up into a ball, praying that someone would somehow dispel such a plausible genjutsu. Naruto, what are you doing here? Minato asked calmly, placing his hand protectively on the child's thin shoulder. Just as the little boy was about to say something, a woman standing on the balcony intervened. Oh, Hokage-sama, how good you were passing by. That kid must be out of his mind. He claimed he was living in my apartment, that you weren't Hokage now, but the third. He escaped from a mental hospital, right? Huh? I'd be very grateful if you refrain from making such comments, Minato said firmly, interrupting the woman. Looking at Naruto, who was completely confused, he continued, Don't run away again. I'll find you anyway. Come on, kid, you're not fully recovered yet. Having picked up the child in his arms, the fourth disappeared from sight, only to reappear in the hospital. At the hospital a few minutes later. I don't want to. Don't. Naruto whined pitifully, writhing on Minato's lap, his eyes wide as he stared at the approaching nurse holding a syringe. You have to. It's just one little injection, Naruto. It's medicine, Minato said soothingly, holding the struggling boy down, his eyes pleading with the nurse to hurry. I don't need medicine. It'll go away on its own. Wounds heal quickly. I don't want... Ah! Naruto squealed as the needle confidently pierced his body. That's all. The nurse smiled, and Minato winked playfully at the boy, who was grumbling and pulling up his pants. Namake's cheerful mood was so infectious that a few seconds later Naruto's eyes lit up with childish joy and insouciance, and a genuine smile graced his face. Minato! Tsunade's voice interrupted the good moment as she peered into the room. The fourth one turned around and, throwing Naruto a gentle smile, followed the head doctor. So? Are the test results ready? Minato asked first, earning a thoughtful look from Tsunade. The results are ready, and they're simply stunning. Please leave your feedback. Chapter 5 Minato. Tsunade's voice interrupted the good moment as she peered into the room. The fourth one turned around and, throwing Naruto a gentle smile, followed the head doctor. So? Are the test results ready? Minato asked first, earning a thoughtful look from Tsunade. The results are ready, and they're simply stunning. A few minutes later in the head doctor's office. I didn't believe it, so I assumed there was some kind of mistake and reran the test, only to get the same result. I don't know how something like this could have happened. You'll have to sort it out, but I can only say one thing for sure. Tsunade suddenly fell silent and stared at Minato, unsure how to continue. Well? The blonde waved his hand, urging the doctor to finish his sentence, since he liked waiting the least. So Naruto is your son. Konoha's best medic stunned the fourth, finally gathering her courage. For about a minute, a tense, deathly silence reigned in the office, and the Hokage stared blankly at Tsunade, trying to figure out whether she was serious or just trying to play a joke on him. His brain completely refused to accept or comprehend such unexpected news, so Minato simply sat in his chair, trying to process everything and, once he'd heard correctly, find the right words. What? What do you mean this isn't a mistake? Namake's croaked barely audibly, once the initial stage of stupefaction had passed and his brain began to work. No, there was no mistake, Senju replied just as quietly but confidently, and, Noticing 1,001 questions in the Hokage's blue eyes, she hastened to explain everything. As I already said, when the DNA results were ready, I didn't believe them and did a second test, deciding to compare Naruto's DNA not only with Kushina's blood, but with yours as well. To be on the safe side, so to speak. But how? You know perfectly well that before having a child, Kushina wanted to reseal the fox. It's simply impossible. Minato, the match percentage is 99.9999%. That only happens between a child and their parents. The head doctor interrupted Minato, who was starting to get angry at not understanding the situation. You can't argue with the test results. Even if it's hard for you to accept and believe, the fact remains. Naruto is your and Kushina's son. Surprisingly, the fourth didn't argue any further or try to find any inconsistencies or errors. Instead, he simply stood up and, casting a tired, confused glance at the blonde, declared that he needed to think and sort everything out. Leaving the head doctor's office, Namikaze headed to the Hokage Tower. After all, he still had several unsigned reports to complete, and this was the perfect opportunity to take a break and clear his head. Minato! Minato? Kushina had tried 15 times to get her husband's attention, but he seemed to be on another planet and refused to return to Earth. Finally, the mistress of the bloody seas got tired of talking to the wall. Namikaze Minato! The scarlet-haired girl screamed at the top of her lungs, rewarding her husband with a slap for good measure. Ow! Kushina, damn, that hurt! The blonde reacted instantly, rubbing the bump that had appeared on his forehead. I'm actually the Hokage. You're not supposed to hit me. Minato muttered childishly, glaring at his wife with an offended expression. The scarlet-haired woman sighed and handed him a cold spoon to soothe the throbbing lump. Pulling her chair closer to her husband, she rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. For a while, they sat in complete silence. Are you thinking about Naruto? She asked wearily, and, receiving an affirmative nod, continued, Yes, how is that even possible? Well, I mean... Kushina couldn't find the strength to finish the sentence. And why? So everything is clear, just not understandable. Flashback. So what did Tsunade-sama say? Namikaze asked her husband, who had just entered the house. Does Naruto really belong to the Uzumaki clan? The girl was bubbling with anticipation, but Minato merely gave her an odd look and, without answering her question, went into the kitchen. It's strange. What's wrong with him? Kushina muttered under her breath, confused, as her husband had never behaved like this before. Blaming it on the overwhelming amount of paperwork, the girl followed the fourth and, putting on an apron, began heating up the food. 15 minutes later. Minato, is something bothering you? The scarlet-haired girl asked solicitously, examining Minato's pensive face. You can tell me, you know. Together we can figure something out. She confidently raised her fist and smiled. Namikaze didn't answer. You're already on your 10th Onigiri. What happened? Kushina folded her arms across her chest, making it clear she wouldn't leave until she knew the truth. Minato sighed and, rummaging through the pockets of his famous cloak, pulled out a small piece of paper folded in half and handed it to his wife. She took it and immediately began reading. With each line, her expression grew increasingly puzzled, and finally, quietly, in utter shock, she said, Is that our true? Naruto. He's really our son? Minato nodded inside. Oh. Kushina sank into a chair, completely lost and not understanding anything. End flashback. I can't say what I'm feeling at all. Minato suddenly broke the silence, carefully stroking his wife's hair. When I found out about this, I was in a kind of stupor, and I still am now, but at the same time, I felt joy. I felt the same way. Kushina confirmed. No matter how, he's still our son. Just think, we're parents. This time the girl smiled, and her eyes sparkled with happiness. Naruto, He looks so much like you, just a miniature version." Noticing her husband's interested look, she confirmed, "Yes, I visited him today, but he was sleeping at the time. But the boy's face is shaped like mine." The couple laughed. "And yet, I'm still tormented by this question. Who is he?" No, we've already found out who he is." "Where is he from?" "While I was sorting through mountains of reports, I remembered our meeting. Naruto shied away from me and called me a ghost. And today, when I found him near the dorm, Madame Rose said Naruto said the Hokage is now the third. This is all very interesting. Maybe he's from another world?" Kushina suggested innocently. "Why not? Stranger things have happened." In response, Minato rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Well, at least this theory has some merit, since it explains Naruto's words and reaction. Okay, it's getting late now. Time to go to bed, and tomorrow morning you and I will visit Naruto and ask him about everything, okay?" asked the fourth, already knowing what the answer would be. "I was just about to suggest it," Kushina shouted, smiling. Naruto sat in his hospital bed, arms crossed over his chest, staring out the window with a disgruntled expression. He wasn't allowed to leave the hospital for a week, and the doctor had threatened that if Naruto tried to escape again, she would tie him to the bed and keep him there for a month. Naturally, the little boy immediately promised to stay put and not go anywhere, as the mere thought of a month of hospital arrest made his already disheveled hair stand on end. Even though Naruto had vowed to stay in the hospital, even an hour locked up inside felt like hell to the restless boy, let alone a week. There were no games or magazines in the hospital, and the only entertainment for the little boy were the birds fluttering from branch to branch outside the window, humming cheerful tunes. One of the birds, apparently the youngest, clumsily spread its wings and performed a sort of leap flight to another branch. Having reached its destination, the bird became overjoyed and folded its wings too soon, causing it to lose its balance and hang upside down from the branch, as if parodying circus performers on a trapeze. All this brought a smile to Naruto's face as he watched, soon replaced by a mischievous laugh. At that moment, there was a knock on the door and, without waiting for an answer, they entered. Minato appeared at the threshold, accompanied by a rather cute girl, whose scarlet hair flowed beautifully down her back and shoulders and reached almost to her ankles. "Please leave your feedback. Chapter 6 The door to room 311 creaked open, distracting the fair-haired child from his birdwatching. Turning at the sound, the little boy saw the fourth Hokage, who had dragged him to this terribly boring place, the hospital, and a pretty girl with ankle-length scarlet hair. Hello. Are you here to see me?" Naruto asked timidly, immediately realizing how stupid he'd said it. The fourth and his companion were unlikely to go to the wrong door. But how was a small child, hated by everyone just a few days ago, supposed to react? No one ever came to see him. "Yes. Hello, Naruto." The girl smiled sweetly, walking into the room and sitting down on the chair next to the boy's bed. Minato simply stood next to his wife. Naruto nodded in greeting and turned his blue eyes to the Hokage, running through all the possible reasons for his visit. But he hadn't done anything wrong, so he was unlikely to be in trouble. At least, that's what the kid thought, until he remembered that ill-fated kiosk he'd been so diligently painting 2 days ago, the one where all the strange things had started. "How are you feeling? Does anything hurt?" Minato's calm voice brought the boy back to the real world. "Wonderful!" Naruto responded automatically, jumping up sharply on the bed, then falling back down with a cry, clutching his chest and coughing painfully. "Shh! You're still recovering, so try not to make any sudden movements. Here, drink this," Minato said in a gentle but firm tone, handing the child a glass of water. Naruto drank just a little bit, after which he calmed down and sat down on the bed with an embarrassed look. "Sorry," the boy muttered quietly, then, looking out the window, continued, I'm perfectly fine, that's true. My chest and right arm are just a little sore, but that'll pass soon. All my wounds heal instantly, so there's nothing to worry about. And anyway, even if something serious were to happen to me, no one would notice. Naruto explained cheerfully, awkwardly scratching his neck. Even if you have fast regeneration, Kushina said quietly, lowering her head and covering her eyes with her hair, causing Minato and Naruto to sense an evil aura. Even if that's true, you shouldn't be so indifferent to your health. You're still a child. You have your whole life ahead of you. What will happen to your life if... Kushina couldn't finish, her eyes flashing, and her hands clenched into fists. Don't you dare say something like that. Sorry. Naruto squeaked in fear, pressing himself into the bed. I was just telling the truth. I recover quickly, and no one needs me. My parents died when the demon fox attacked Konoha, and the whole village disliked me for some reason. It's probably because of my constant pranks. But I don't want to just disappear. At that moment, the tremor disappeared from the boy's voice, and his eyes lit up with determination. I will try really hard, and I will definitely become Hokage. I will surpass all the previous ones. I can do it. You want to become Hokage then? Minato said thoughtfully, raising his hand to his face. Well, I think you can do it. He winked at the fair-haired child, who looked up at him in disbelief. You really think so? You're not going to laugh at me? Naruto asked, shocked, with a hint of hope in his voice, and Minato nodded cautiously. After this harmless gesture from the adult, something astonishing happened. Instead of smiling, the child pursed his lips and lowered his head. His arms wrapped around his frail body, and his shoulders trembled slightly. Minato exchanged confused glances with his wife, trying to figure out what he'd said wrong. Hey, kiddo, what happened? Everything's okay. Kushina reached out to the boy and gently took his chin, forcing him to look at her. Naruto's blue eyes turned red, and salty, clear drops of water streamed down his face. What's wrong? I didn't say anything bad, Minato said tenderly, placing his hand on the child's blonde head and tousling the unruly hair. Naruto smiled weakly and began to sob again. Nobody ever told me that. They all laughed at me, and I just can't believe it, Naruto said, choking back tears. Arigato. Instead of answering, Minato and Kushina, without a word, pulled the unfortunate child into a warm embrace, letting him cry out all the tears of pain and relief. When the baby calmed down a bit, he realized how pitiful he must look and, blushing, quickly slipped out of the embrace. Well, here I am, already going to the academy, and now I'm sitting here crying like a little girl. Naruto grinned, wiping away his tears. Thank you so much, now I feel more confident. Naruto sighed happily. Suddenly, his good mood vanished, and fear appeared on his face. Damn it, Academy! Iruka-sensei's going to kill me! XO! Naruto yelled, jumping out of bed and, ignoring the hospital gown, rushed out of the room, saying, Excuse me, I have to run, leaving the stunned adults inside. Naruto. The fourth was the first to come to his senses and, running out of the room, began to catch up with the fleeing child. Come back here. Unfortunately, Naruto never liked following orders, and seeing the fourth Hokage chasing him from behind, he increased his speed, running full speed through the hospital. As the child ran past the head doctor's office, the door opened, and Tsunade appeared in the hallway, holding a large stack of papers. She appeared so suddenly that poor Naruto didn't have time to brake and crashed into her at full speed. A multitude of papers flew into the air and began to gracefully fall to the floor. Naruto, with a curt, "Excuse me," rose to his feet and dashed through the hallways again. Just then, Minato came around the corner and, running around Tsunade, who was sitting on the floor in a daze, disappeared from sight. Minato! How many times do I have to tell you not to run around the hospital? the top medic yelled, coming to her senses, blushing with anger and clenching her hands into fists. Namikaze, who had clearly heard the blonde's angry tirade, felt goosebumps break out and made a mental note to avoid the head doctor's office for the time being. The fourth managed to catch the little fugitive only on the street, where he could safely use his teleportation technique and avoid the need to constantly weave between people. Picking Naruto up and tucking him under his arm, Minato, with a sense of accomplishment, walked back to the hospital, trying to ignore his son's pleas and resistance. When they reached Naruto's room, both blondes looked rather angry and tired. Minato lowered the boy onto the bed and gave him a displeased look, tinged with just the slightest hint of curiosity. "What was that?" Kushina asked the boy, crossing her arms over her chest and frowning. "You can't make any sudden movements, let alone run. The wounds might reopen." "I didn't mean to," Naruto whined pitifully. "Please let me go. Iruka-sensei will kill me if I skip class again." Minato and Kushina exchanged glances. Sighing, the four sat down on the boy's bed and placed a hand on his shoulder. After all, he had come here to check on Naruto and ask him a few questions, the answers to which might shed light on this convoluted story. "Do you like rice balls?" Kushina asked the child before her husband could speak, taking out several neat little balls of rice from the small bag she'd been holding since the beginning. Naruto's eyes lit up with joy, and he nodded quickly, taking one of the balls and immediately shoving it into his mouth. This is delicious," Naruto muttered, chewing on his bun, for which he received a playful slap on the back of the head from the girl. "Don't talk with your mouth full, or you'll choke." Kushina wagged her finger, smiling affectionately. Naruto merely made a disgruntled, insolent face before devoured the delicacy with even greater zeal. "By the way, who are you? I know Yondaime-sama, but I've never seen you," Naruto asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Oh, right!" Minato slapped his forehead. "We completely forgot. Naruto, this is Kushina, my wife. By the way, she, like you, belongs to the Uzumaki clan." The blonde stuttered casually. "Uzumaki?" Naruto said thoughtfully. "As far as I remember, I'm the only one in Konoha with that last name. And I have no relatives, since they're all dead or missing long ago." The boy stared blankly at Kushina, who felt uneasy under the intense attention. "Well, when Minato and I got married, I became Namikaze, but that doesn't change the story of my origin." The girl smiled, closing her eyes. "Yes, I guess," the child said after a short thought, once again biting his sharp teeth into the rice bowl. "Hokage-sama." "Call me Minato," the older blonde asked, interrupting the boy and smiling affectionately. Minato-san, what about the academy, and where will I live now? Some woman has taken over my apartment," Naruto asked, frowning. Minato and Kushina smiled. "Well, first of all, don't worry about the academy. You're skipping classes on the Hokage's orders, and that's a very valid excuse. Secondly, since you have nowhere else to go, I suggest you stay with us. And thirdly, Naruto, have you seen anything unusual lately?" Minato asked. "Maybe something that scared you, or something you've never seen before, some kind of technique, I don't know." Come to think of it." The boy rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then snapped his fingers contentedly. "Yes, I remember. Before I saw you, 5 guys attacked me. I remember at the end, they formed seals for the technique and a light appeared. It scared me right away, but then there were lots of colors and it was beautiful. And when the light disappeared, those guys were gone and you were walking past." Naruto rattled off, smiling. "So it's true," Minato said barely audibly, but the boy's keen hearing still caught his voice. "Is it true? Something's wrong." The little boy blinked his eyelashes in confusion, his blue eyes fixed on the adults. "Nothing." Kushina smiled happily, waving her hand. Minato followed his wife's example and pretended He hadn't said anything and Naruto had imagined something. "No, I want to know," Naruto pouted, sitting comically on the bed. Minato winked cheerfully at the little boy and ruffled his hair, while Kushina fished out her 7th rice ball from the bag and, without saying anything, triumphantly handed it to Naruto, who was licking his lips. Please leave your feedback. Chapter 7 A playful ray of sunlight, just rising into the sky, nimbly slipped through the thin curtains and fell upon the sleeping boy's face, wrapped up to his ears in a light blanket. The little boy closed his eyes in displeasure and, after tossing and turning a bit more, gave in, opening his sky-blue eyes. Stretching sweetly and casting aside all remnants of the longed-for but cut-off sleep, Naruto sat up in bed and looked out the window. It was already light outside, and birds were singing various tunes in unison. On the roof of a nearby building, a March cat purred at the top of its lungs, purring its beloved serenade, undeterred by the furious shouts of people, the frying pans thrown at it, and the threats of taking Murka elsewhere or taking it, the cat, to the vet. Young mothers were gathering at the playground, pushing strollers with mischievous, rosy-cheeked toddlers who didn't want to sleep, and through the deserted streets, backpacks slung on their backs, future ninja of the Hidden Leaf hurried to the Shinobi Academy. Looking at all this, the fair-haired child smiled a little sadly. After all, he was stuck in the hospital and couldn't enjoy life to the fullest. However, the sad smile soon faded, replaced by a smug smirk that promised more trouble for Konoha. Today was a significant day for Naruto. Tsunade Senju, the hospital's head physician, had finally heard the boy's pleas and agreed to release him into the wild. The 4th Hokage and his volatile, yet very sweet wife were expected to come for him soon. Smiling to himself, Naruto glanced at the small calendar again, confirmed that the day of his discharge had finally arrived, and throwing his arms up in victory and making his bed, he flew off to the hospital showers on wings of joy. "Minato, what color would Naruto like better? Blue, or maybe he'd prefer orange?" Kushina asked her husband's opinion for the 100th time, looking through several overalls, pants, and shirts. "How should I know?" Fourth raised a tired eyebrow, and, rubbing the bridge of his nose, continued thoughtfully. "Considering the fact that you've turned the baby's room into one solid orange and already bought him a dozen orange t-shirts, I suggest we brighten things up a bit and buy him a blue or green jumpsuit," Minato suggested, looking at the little things. "Actually, I'd ask him first. So much orange." "Hey, don't pick on the color orange," the scarlet-haired woman said indignantly, not letting her husband finish his sentence. "Orange means—" Yes, I remember. Orange is the color of your clan, the sun, joy, I think, and something else." Namikaze finished his wife's sentence, ruffling his shock of golden hair. "But I just don't get it. What does the sun have to do with orange? It's yellow, isn't it?" At that last comment, Kushina clenched her fists and began counting to 40 in her head, then calmed down and wandered over to the nearby clothing aisles. After all, she loved Minato very much and couldn't stay angry for long over such trivial matters, and starting a fight in the store would have been, to say the least, strange and rude. Grabbing a couple of blue, green, and, of course, orange items, the mistress of the bloody seas trudged contentedly to the checkout. Naruto was actively shedding his tiresome hospital gown, periodically glancing out the window, hoping to spot familiar figures. Finally, just as he was about to leave the hospital, a loud poof sounded, and a snow-white haze filled the room. Naruto, in complete shock and confusion, pressed himself against the wall, thinking the bad guys were about to attack him again. "Tepane! How many times do I have to tell you not to use that technique with me? I can't breathe!" Naruto recognized the voice immediately, despite the obvious hint of irritation. The boy's suspicions were soon confirmed by a small silhouette breaking through the haze toward the window and flinging it wide open. The white fog that had filled the entire room instantly vanished into the street, revealing a scarlet-haired girl hanging on the windowsill, greedily gulping oxygen, and a slightly agitated fourth Hokage. "How are you, Naruto? Ready to move?" Minato asked, determined to divert his wife's attention from himself and thereby save his own life. Oddly enough, the plan worked, and Kushina, who a moment ago had been ready to tear her beloved husband into 1,000 pieces, calmed down and looked tenderly at her future son. "That's right, kiddo, if you need anything, don't be shy and tell us." She rubbed her neck awkwardly and closed her eyes. Minato chuckled slightly, and Naruto looked at the girl in disbelief. He'd liked her from their very first meeting, but he simply wasn't used to attention from any adult yet. Unbidden tears welled up in the boy's eyes, and he covered his face with his sleeve, not wanting to show his weakness. Minato and Kushina exchanged confused and slightly surprised glances, wondering what they'd said wrong this time. Naruto seemed to notice their confusion and hastened to clarify. "And no, don't get me wrong, Databeo. I just, no one's ever treated me like this before, and I'm not used to it, but holy shit, anyway, well, I'm happy." Naruto rattled off, occasionally interrupted by quiet sobs. The fourth Hokage and his wife exchanged glances and, without a word, pulled the crying baby into a warm embrace. The child froze in shock for a second, but the next moment, his tiny body pressed against the couple, showing his complete trust. It was the happiest moment in the little, now ex-Jinchuriki's life. After a good 15 minutes of hugging, the baby finally calmed down and, his eyes reddened from tears, but very happy, looked at the adults. They responded with gentle smiles. "So, are you ready to go home now?" Minato asked, winking at his son and offering him his hand. The boy narrowed his eyes slyly in response and gave Namikaze a smile that promised a lot of trouble. Finally, the blonde boy offered his hand to the fourth, who helped him out of bed. A very unusual family emerged from the ward and soon disappeared from the sight of the medical staff, heading for a spacious house somewhere in the middle of Konoha. Naruto had always dreamed of strolling down the street like this with his parents, and it seemed fate had finally decided to make concessions and give the little boy everything he had been deprived of for 8 years, since birth. Please leave your feedback. Chapter 8 Two blonde men and a scarlet-haired girl leisurely approached a small mansion located approximately in the center of the Hidden Leaf. Passing through the gate, Naruto looked around in amazement. Next to the house was a garden literally drowning in a variety of flowers. The young ex-Jinchuriki had never seen such beauty in his life. Right next to the house grew a young cherry tree, in full bloom, slowly dropping delicate pink petals onto the cool ground. Next to the tree, a small pond had been dug, in which the silhouettes of swimming fish could be discerned. The rest of the garden was ablaze with timid violets, proud roses, stately peonies, dahlias, tulips, and daffodils, as well as other flowers whose names Naruto didn't know. "Kushina got carried away with floristry, and this is what came out of it." The fourth chuckled, noticing the little boy's stunned face. "What's wrong?" the scarlet-haired girl responded. There was a distinct challenge in her voice, but Minato simply ignored it and gave his wife a disarming smile, causing the girl to instantly hesitate, unsure of what to say. "This is amazing," Naruto muttered under his breath, his eyes wide open as he stared at the garden. "Really?" Kushina immediately turned her attention to the boy. "Well, like Minato said, I once got into flowers and thought it would be fun to plant them all around the perimeter of the garden. It was a lot of trouble choosing the colors, but with Yamanaka-san's help, it all turned out quite nice." The scarlet-haired girl chirped happily, glad that at least this little one shared her interests. "Okay, that's all very well, but Naruto, maybe you should come inside? I'll show you your room." Mother and son glanced at Minato, who stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, his whole demeanor making it clear that the boy would have time to admire the flowers later, but right now he had more important things to do. Huh? I'll get my own room? Naruto immediately switched to a new topic, running up to the Hokage like a bullet and looking his blue eyes into identical, only wiser and calmer ones. Of course, the older blonde couldn't help but smile and ruffled the child's unruly hair. Naruto squealed happily and, without even waiting for the adults, rushed into the house. Where's all this energy coming from? He's still a kid, though. I recognize Kushina. Namikaze shook his head, trying to find the fair-haired child inside the apartment, but unfortunately, the little one was nowhere to be found. Naruto! The fourth wife called to the blonde boy, and when she didn't receive an answer, she began searching the house. Naruto! Come out! Naruto! Minato joined his wife, when he suddenly noticed tousled strands of golden hair in the very corner of the room. The baby's body was carefully wrapped in a curtain and hidden by a flower pot. Uh-huh. So, where's Naruto? I can't find him anywhere. Namikaze said thoughtfully, winking at Kushina and pointing his finger at the invisible one, trying his best to play along with the kid. Naruto chuckled softly, but then covered his mouth with his hand. The boy hadn't realized he'd already been discovered and was incredibly proud of his camouflage skills. The Namikaze couple circled around for another 10 minutes, after which Kushina, tired of bending over and pretending to search diligently, crept quietly up to the young blonde's hiding spot and, with a triumphant cry of, "Uh-huh! Found it!" scooped the little boy into a tight embrace. Naruto burst into a hearty laugh, and since the sunny child had such a contagious laugh, very soon the entire Hokage family was rolling on the floor in fits of uncontrollable laughter. Well, Naruto, that's enough fun, Minato muttered, holding his stomach, which was aching from laughter, with his hand. Now let's go, look at your room. If you don't like anything, tell me. We'll come up with something. Naruto nodded obediently and, placing his small hand in the fourth's broad one, stomped up to the second floor of the building. Kushina, still laughing, followed the blondes. Cool! 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 The little blonde boy rejoiced, jumping on the large, spacious bed for about half an hour. The orange bedspread had long since slipped to the floor, but the blonde boy cared little or nothing about it. When Minato and Kushina opened the door to the room, which would henceforth rightfully bear the name Children's, Naruto stood there in disbelief. Everything he could dream of was there. A ton of toys, a TV, a spacious bed, and a desk perfect for drawing, doing homework, and all sorts of other things. But most importantly, almost the entire room was orange. The little boy couldn't have imagined this, since all the adults, who were still able to listen to him or talk to him normally unanimously insisted that such bright colors only irritated the eyes, not pleased them. Naruto tried to understand the meaning of these words, but he couldn't. Orange! The little boy practically worshipped the color, and so this surprise probably pleased him more than anything else. What's he doing there? Minato asked his wife, looking up from the newspaper and listening to the cries of joy and the creaking of furniture coming from the boy's room. What difference does it make? The main thing is he likes it, smiled the crimson-haired girl standing by the stove. A fragrant aroma wafted from the pot, and anyone entering Forth's apartment now would be sure to tell that something delicious was cooking there. That's true. Looks like he liked your love of orange, Minato said cheerfully, quickly dodging the towel thrown at him. Don't attack. Orange. The color, she said menacingly, according to Kushina, but her gaze showed she was merely amused by the situation and had no intention of being angry. At this, the four sighed with relief and returned to the Konoha news. Naruto sat on the carpet, holding the figurines he'd been using to fight himself. He soon grew tired of voicing the good and bad shinobi and waving his arms, so he moved to the table and picked up his pencils. The first thing that appeared on the blank sheet of paper was a red-orange sun, followed by white-blue clouds and green grass. Following the landscape, colorful butterflies and a blonde blob-like figure appeared on the paper, clearly denoting the artist himself. Naruto smiled and, his teeth chattering against the pencil, began carefully drawing two more figures next to him, yellow and red. He was probably drawing Minato and Kushina, and while the fourth Hokage bore any resemblance to himself, his wife, despite the young blonde's arduous efforts, was practically drowning in her own hair and raising one arm in an overly menacing manner. After casting a critical eye on the drawing, Naruto drew a bouquet of flowers on Kushina's hand, and now the scarlet-haired fury was angrily swinging a multicolored broom at those watching her. The boy was now satisfied with his work and smiled happily. "Naruto, come eat dinner!" Kushina's clear voice rang out from the kitchen. The blonde flinched in surprise, but quickly recovered and, licking his lips, dashed downstairs. As Naruto ran to the kitchen, a delicious aroma hit his nose, unmistakable. Ramen. It was definitely his favorite dish. "Itadakimasu!" The young fidget shouted, breaking his chopsticks and ready to grab some noodles from the plate when suddenly someone's hand stopped him halfway. "Eat something healthier first." "A salad, for example," Minato said affectionately, ruffling the boy's hair. Seeing the complete bewilderment in Naruto's eyes, he explained, "Eating ramen on an empty stomach isn't very healthy, despite its amazing taste. Save it for an appetizer." The blonde-haired boy couldn't understand how anyone could eat anything but ramen, but he nodded in agreement and obediently reached for the tomato and cucumber salad. After licking the sour cream off the bowl, Naruto looked questioningly at the fourth and, receiving a nod, began to devour his beloved ramen, his eyes sparkling happily. Dinner was quite cheerful. Naruto talked about his dreams and hobbies, and the Namakazes listened attentively, smiling and encouraging him whenever he seemed upset. In short, it was the kind of family idol Naruto had dreamed of since childhood. Finally, dinner came to an end, and Kushina began to clear the table. Minato. He actively helped with this, and Naruto simply watched them and smiled happily. Very soon, a yawn escaped his mouth, and his eyes closed tiredly. Today was a very eventful day. There's no need to torture yourself. Go to your room and get a good night's sleep, Kushina said tenderly, looking up from the pile of dishes. Your pajamas are under the pillow. I hope you like them. Naruto's eyes lit up for a moment, but fatigue took over and the boy only nodded sleepily. Uh-huh. Good night, the baby mumbled, rubbing his eyes, and stomped towards the stairs leading to the second floor. Good night, Naruto. Minato and Kushina stopped what they were doing and, approaching the boy, gently hugged him and kissed him. The little boy blushed and tried to feign displeasure, as if to say, I'm already an adult. But it ended with all three of them bursting into laughter. Come on, you need to rest, Minato said with a smile, ruffling Naruto's already messy hair. I'm planning on taking you to the academy tomorrow, right? He asked, raising an eyebrow. The boy immediately shook his head and said he'd been meaning to ask. Well, then run to bed, the fourth ordered jokingly. Naruto nodded happily and disappeared upstairs. The fair-haired child twirled in front of the mirror for half a minute, examining his new orange pajamas, which featured a very cute frog print. Pleased with his new nightwear, the boy ran across the room and jumped onto the soft bed, immediately wrapping himself in a soft blanket. In about half a minute, the baby, for the first time in a long time, slept peacefully and soundly, all past grievances forgotten. The bullying and mistreatment were a thing of the past, and a new life had begun, one in which he, too, was needed, where no one teased or bullied him. A life he could only dream of before. Well, dreams do come true, you just have to believe in them. Naruto learned this from his own experience. Please leave your feedback. Chapter 9 Naruto woke up early. No, that's not it. He woke up very, very early, which was strange in itself. Sitting up in bed and stretching lusciously, the boy tried to find an explanation for this unexpected occurrence, but he couldn't, no matter how hard he tried. Finally, he got tired of thinking, and after making his bed, he trudged to the bathroom to shower and brush his teeth. The now former Jinchuriki couldn't get used to the fact that his life had changed dramatically in this world and that someone needed him. So when he bumped into Minato in the bathroom, the little blonde almost screamed in surprise. But fortunately, he quickly remembered what was going on. Naruto? Wiping his face with a fluffy towel, the fourth raised an eyebrow in surprise. Why are you up so early? Indeed, the small clock standing timidly on the edge of the washing machine showed exactly 5:30 a.m. The blonde boy whistled in surprise. He knew, of course, that he'd broken all his records for getting up, but not by that much, and shrugged, somewhat sheepishly. A moment of tense silence fell over the bathroom. No one knew what to say, and there wasn't really anything to talk about. Oh well, but the day will be longer, right? Fourth asked, more as a clarification than a question, winking mischievously at the confused child. Oh yeah. Naruto nodded a little nervously in response and looked Minato over thoughtfully. It wasn't that he was at a loss in the Hokage's presence. Quite the opposite, actually, but there was something about the man that made the young mischief maker think, something the boy rarely did. The academy opens at 8:30. I think I'll take the day off today, if you want. We can go for a walk after breakfast. You still have plenty of time, Minato suggested unexpectedly, looking into his sky-blue eyes, the same as his own. The metamorphoses that took place on the child's face revealed the child's joy completely, so the fourth could not hold back a light chuckle, looking at how the boy tried with all his might to give his face an indifferently calm expression. I take it you agree? Namikaze asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear it from the child himself. Why, yes. To make his words more convincing, the boy nodded with all his might, and the next second he winced from the pain that pierced his neck. That's right. Never make such sudden movements. It could cramp the muscles even more. The fourth one was immediately at Naruto's side, and began vigorously rubbing the child's neck, causing the latter to literally howl. Minato understood perfectly well how intense the pain of a cramp could be, and therefore sincerely pitied the unfortunate boy. But if the tense muscle wasn't relaxed immediately, the consequences could be dire. So the adult continued to massage the blonde boy's thin neck, despite his cries and pleas to stop. What's going on here? Kushina suddenly, there's no other way to put it, appeared in the doorway of the ill-fated bathroom, looking at her husband and son with genuine bewilderment. The fact that the baby kept screaming alarmed the scarlet-haired girl. Naru, the fourth began, but fate took pity on the younger blonde, and the cramp released his neck. The boy stopped screaming and hung limply in the Hokage's arms. Oh no, it's okay, Minato happily informed his wife, who gave him a puzzled look. Okay, the girl exhaled, shaking the ladle she grabbed on her way upstairs. It's good that everything's fine now. I don't understand why you got up so early. She pointed the kitchen utensil at her husband, then at her son. But go have breakfast, or the pancakes will get cold. Naruto's tongue barely stuck out at the pancake statement, and the boy rushed into the kitchen like a rocket, as if he hadn't been, dying, in the Hokage's arms a minute ago. Minato and Kushina could only exchange glances and marvel at how an 8-year-old could muster so much energy. However, the fact that Naruto had Kushina Uzumaki's blood in him explained a lot. I never listened to what the teacher said. That's probably why I can't do anything. But what can I do if all their explanations are so boring and monotonous that I fall asleep after 10 minutes? Besides, not a single sensei kept me in their class for long. And then Iruka-sensei came. He's really good. Naruto swung back and forth on the wooden swing, glancing at the fourth from time to time and noting his reaction to his modest account of his life. To the young blonde's surprise, Minato showed no signs of displeasure or mockery. The adult's eyes reflected only understanding, and a certain sympathy, which was most likely why the boy had decided to open up to the fourth about his concerns. Well, Irika-sensei is very good. When he became my homeroom teacher, he didn't kick me out of the classroom because of my mischief, but ordered me to stay and started the lesson. It's just... Here the boy hesitated and looked at Minato awkwardly. Of all his speeches and lectures, all I remember is that Sensei's zodiac sign is Pisces, and that he has several hobbies. At this point, Minato couldn't help but let out a small chuckle. Naruto smiled awkwardly in response. I see you can't stand theory. So what practice? Minato raised an eyebrow questioningly and, seeing no agreement in the child's eyes, understood. No, I don't think so. I guess I'm just a worthless ninja with no hope of being recognized. The blonde boy hesitated. Well, that's a bit too critical of yourself, Minato drawled. I'm sure you'll learn everything yet. I will become Hokage. Even if I remain a student at the academy for the lifetime, I will definitely become Hokage. I will make everyone in the village recognize me. Naruto suddenly burst into such a passionate speech that he didn't notice how his voice reached a pitch that the passers-by began to glance suspiciously at the disturber of the silence. If you believe, your dream will come true. Namikaze smiled and lightly ruffled the child's blonde hair. Besides, I don't think you're incapable of anything or have any abilities. You definitely have them. You just need to try hard enough to find them. You know, you really lifted my spirits, Naruto said, casting a grateful glance at the Hokage. Rarely does anyone pay attention to me, much less listen to me. Thank you. You're welcome. Minato smiled and was about to add something else when suddenly a tiny alarm clock in his pocket began to ring, reminding him that classes at the academy were about to start, and he needed to hurry if he wanted to send Naruto there today. What? Is it time already? The young Uzumaki watched the Hokage carefully as he set the alarm, and quickly realized the clock read about 15 past 8. It wouldn't be good if they were late. Yeah. Well, shall we go? The fourth extended his hand to the boy, and when the child's hand grabbed it, he used his famous instant teleportation technique, and the blondes disappeared from the playground. Everyone, attention! We have a new student. Naruto stood in the center of the classroom, his new teacher, Irika Yumino, standing behind him, introducing him to the class. Speaking of class, everyone had known Naruto for a long time, but judging by their interested expressions, they were seeing him for the first time. Not a blue-blooded person, but I ask you to love and favor him. On this note, the teacher finished introducing him and pointed the boy to an empty seat in the classroom next to a blonde girl. As far as Naruto remembered, this was Ino Yamanaka, his beloved Sakura-chan's eternal rival for their beloved Sasuke-kun. Please leave your feedback. Chapter 10 Naruto's first, well, almost first, day at the Shinobi Academy began almost successfully. His old, new classmates welcomed him warmly, and without complaint, the children eyed the newcomer with interest and smiled kindly at him. Naruto, who had dreamed of making at least one friend his entire short life, barely suppressed his joyful cries and the urge to rush through the classroom and engulf every smiling child in a heartfelt hug. So where should I seat you? The teacher rubbed his chin thoughtfully, looking around the room for empty seats. Okay, sit next to Ino for now. Irika pointed to the seat next to the blonde girl, whom Naruto recognized as Sakura-chan's best friend. The prospect of being in Yamanaka's company made young Uzumaki wince slightly. It wasn't that the boy had any problems with the girl back at his home world. Ino treated him well, or perhaps simply didn't notice the blonde's existence. But the young flower girl was known for her rather difficult and proud personality, leaving Uzumaki completely unsure how to communicate with her. Whatever. Everyone acts differently here. Maybe if I can befriend her, Sakura-chan will finally notice me. The former Jinchuriki reasoned, perking up and confidently heading for the second row, where there was an empty seat right next to the window. Sitting down at his wooden, and therefore slightly rough, desk, Naruto laid out Kushina's school supplies on the table. A pen, pencil, eraser, a couple of notebooks, and a pencil case. The young blonde particularly liked the pencil case. A pair of green, comically smiling frogs splashed merrily in a river and admired the rainbow glimmering over the pond. The artist had done a wonderful job of drawing this, and if Naruto hadn't known what frogs actually looked like, he would have believed the image. Since childhood, the boy had been drawn to the aforementioned species of various animals, and it wasn't entirely clear why. He couldn't explain it himself, but whenever possible, he tried to buy anything he saw as is precious, be it an item of clothing or something less necessary, like school notebooks. But that was before meeting the fourth and his wife. Now that Naruto has a proper home, his own room, and, most importantly, people who seem genuinely concerned about him, the blonde boy is determined to study hard and achieve his goal, becoming Hokage. But that doesn't mean his love of amphibians has faded into the background. Not at all. You might ask, how did Kushina know about Naruto's passion for amphibians? They only met recently. The answer is very simple. One day, when Naruto was still lying in the hospital, bringing freshly baked strawberry jam pies to the boy's room, the fourth's wife found the child sitting in a rather awkward position, enthusiastically drawing those very same frogs. That's when the red-haired woman went to the local market, where she bought this pencil case for her son. But let's not go into details and continue talking about frogs. So Naruto loves those green and bulging ones. So be it. Everyone has different interests, and there's no accounting for taste, right? Hey! Naruto! Irika-sensei's voice rang out like a bolt from the blue, right in the blonde boy's ear. A very annoyed Irika-sensei. What else? The child, still slumbering from a mesmerizing sleep, lazily opened his blue eyes. Irika-sensei? What are you doing here? Yumeno's eye twitched nervously, but the teacher found the strength to contain his anger and refrain from slapping the careless student. Gathering all his irritation into a fist, Irika, with a sadistic grin, deigned to answer the stupid question. What I'm doing here is clear. But what are you doing on your first day at the academy? The sensei hoped to slightly intimidate his student. However, the tone of his voice sent shivers down everyone's spines, including Yumeno's own. At first, Uzumaki looked at his teacher with confusion and a hint of fear, sincerely trying to grasp the thread of the conversation and understand what he'd managed to do when he'd apparently done nothing. Understanding came slowly, but it did come. The boy flushed deeply at the realization of his mistake and mumbled something that sounded like, "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Out of the corner of his eye, Uzumaki glanced around the class. All the kids were looking at the newcomer with undisguised curiosity and amusement, and some weren't even trying to hold back their laughter. Naruto's cheeks turned even redder. Bravo, Naruto! You've proven yourself a clown on your very first day! The boy chided himself with annoyance. How embarrassing. But on the one hand, it's embarrassing, and on the other, you shouldn't have slept in on your very first day of class. The rest of the school day passed more calmly. The teacher chattered incessantly and banged chalk on the board, explaining the basics of shinobi art to the class. Occasionally, he interrupted his impassioned speech with furious gesticulations, apparently hoping to convey, with his hands, what he couldn't with words. On the fifth round of the shuriken-throwing lecture, Naruto began to treacherously drowsy, but the boy heroically held on, and even tried to suppress a yawn. Suddenly, a small noise was heard nearby, and Naruto turned to find the young Yamanaka girl. She had slightly moved away from her desk, and, resting her head on her folded hands, was listlessly watching the back of her overwrought sensei. Ino's gaze was filled with incredible boredom and indifference to everything going on. It seemed as if she would soon simply drift off to sleep, but she couldn't afford that. She might be popular among her classmates, but falling asleep in class certainly wouldn't earn her any respect. So all the blonde could do was slump back on her desk and stare blankly out the window at the trees swaying in the wind and the birds flying past. Naruto stared at the girl for a minute, lost in thought, until a sharp kick to the leg brought him out of his reverie. Returning to this sinful land, Uzumaki felt Yamanaka's gaze on him. Raising an eyebrow questioningly, and without changing her comfortable position, the girl seemed to be asking him, "What are you staring at?" Naruto quickly shook his head, making it clear he was simply lost in thought, and didn't need anything from Ino. The blonde merely shrugged and returned her vague gaze to the window. No matter how hard Naruto tried to wake up and concentrate on his teacher's words, it was difficult. Very difficult. And his curiosity was gradually getting the better of him. In his world, Ino had always been a businesslike, proud, and attentive girl, but here, the pride and efficiency remained, but the attentiveness had clearly waved its hand and evaporated. There was no other way to explain Yamanaka's current behavior. After holding out for a couple of minutes, the blonde gave in and decided to clarify a few things for himself. This required engaging Ino in conversation and quietly extracting the necessary information. Although Naruto doubted the blonde would even answer a single one of his questions, it was worth a try. Is Irika-sensei always so?" The boy paused, searching for a suitable description. "Boring?" He finally found the answer and looked curiously at his classmate. "Always, but—" The blonde examined her nails appraisingly. "He's not boring now, just uninteresting. He was boring when he outdid himself and put even the straight-A student Hinata to sleep, not to mention the others." She tore her gaze away from her nails only to look at a small pocket mirror and fix a golden strand of hair that had escaped from under her hairpin. "I see." Naruto smiled tightly. It seemed Ino wasn't eager to continue the conversation, so the boy chose to remain silent. Why get into trouble? That's right, there's no need. "Don't worry so much." The blonde suddenly decided to stop glumping and chat with the newcomer. After all, the Hokage himself had brought him. Surely the boy was connected to him somehow, and if so, missing the chance to prove herself to the village head would be foolish. After all, if she showed her best side, who knows, maybe she'd be given some very important mission after becoming a Genin, of course, which would make Sasuke notice her, and Lobastea's rival would die of envy. "I remember we had this incident. About 2 weeks ago, I think." Please leave your reviews. Chapter 11 Naruto spent a good hour circling Konoha, cursing himself for the 100th time for asking Ino to show him around the village, just in case, you never know. The blonde saw it as a chance to get closer to a possible relative of the Hokage, and happily agreed. And now they were strolling around Konoha, taking in its main sights. To be honest, they were simply traipsing through Yamanaka's favorite shops, looking at and buying everything that caught their eye. Or rather, Ino was the one examining every little thing and dragging it to the checkout. Naruto, meanwhile, valiantly decided to help his classmate carry all her purchases home. Well, no one asked his opinion, as he decided, "If a girl wants it, a guy will do it, and it doesn't matter whether he wants it or not." That was the principle by which the young Yamanaka operated, rightly believing that this was how things should be. "Listen, this is the 10th boutique you've dragged me into. I thought I asked you to show me Konoha, not a chain of brand stores." Naruto tried to protest. "If you don't like something, then take a look around yourself." Ino's green eyes flashed with displeasure as she opened the door to yet another shop. This time, it sold all sorts of shinobi weapons. Uzumaki, his mouth open for a riposte, froze in shock. He'd never seen anything like it. This shop was simply bursting with a variety of weapons, incredibly sharp throwing knives, their blades shimmering beautifully in the sunlight, heavy spiked maces, trident-shaped kunai with a special teleport formula. Apparently the fourth was a frequent visitor, dual swords of various ranks, incredibly beautiful katanas, six-pronged shuriken, dangerous hammers and poison daggers, Here was everything a shinobi could dream of. Noticing her companion's admiring gaze, the blonde smiled slyly. Apparently, Naruto had never been to such a place before, and was now pleasantly surprised. Which meant he'd be seeing nothing but racks of weapons for the foreseeable future. A perfect excuse to stop his whining about shopping. Once they left, they could confidently go to the next street and buy the boots and blouse she'd been eyeing for a couple of days. "Oh, Ino! Hey!" Naruto's ringing voice brought the daydreaming Yamanaka back to sinful earth. "What's wrong?" The blonde responded, a little tired and irritated, displeased that someone had so brazenly interrupted her reverie. No, it's fine, ha ha." Naruto laughed falsely. Not wanting to test Yamanaka's nerves, the blonde decided not to tell her that she'd been standing in the middle of the store for a couple of minutes, disturbing other customers, her green eyes flickering between a soft blue blouse and scarlet boots. Plus, the girl kept repeating something about how Lobastia will choke herself with anger and envy, and Sasuke-kun will notice true beauty. Yeah, if Yamanaka found out about this, it would be bad news not only for Naruto, but also for the other witnesses of the incident. The situation was defused by the elderly shopkeeper, who approached the boys to ask if they needed his help. Naruto immediately turned his attention to the old man, determined to buy some super mega cool weapon. Ino, shaking her head in disapproval, went to the rack of secret hairpins. It was the new brainchild of the crazy Konoha inventor, a hair accessory that looked like an ordinary hairpin, but with just a slight twist of one of its legs. It instantly transformed into a deadly blade, the tip of which was laced with a fast-acting poison. With such a weapon, a mere scratch on an opponent would send them straight to hell. Or heaven. It all depends on your luck. Minato Namikaze walked through the slightly darkened streets of his home village, wondering where his hyperactive son could have gone. Flashback. About 20 minutes ago, he returned home from work, where he was met by his worried wife. The reason for her worry was, of course, Naruto. The mischievous boy hadn't come home after classes at the academy. At first, Kushina assumed her son was simply distracted by his new acquaintances, so she didn't pay any attention to it. But now, as the clock struck 9 o'clock in the evening and there was no sign of the child, she became seriously worried. She had already run to the academy several times, asking Irika and the other teachers about Naruto, looking for him in various stores that might attract the attention of an 8-year-old. A couple of times, she was lucky, and the shop assistants recognized her son in today's customers, though he was with some girl. Yamanaka Ino, I think. Somewhat reassured that Naruto wasn't alone, Kushina continued her search, but it yielded no further results. Then she decided to visit the Yamanakas, hoping that the missing child would turn up among the clan, drinking tea and eating cookies. Kizu was a close friend of Kushina's and a very kind woman. When her daughter was born, the fourth wife looked at the screaming bundle with a hint of envy, as she and Minato were afraid to have children of their own because a new vessel for the fox had not been found. However, the little fidget was not there either. Ino said that she had said goodbye to Naruto long ago, and he had not shared his future plans with her. Not knowing where else to look for her son, Namikaze decided to wait for her husband. He was supposed to arrive in 5 to 10 minutes. End flashback. And now the fourth Hokage was wandering the streets of Konoha, trying to find his wayward child. He could, of course, use the seal he'd left on Naruto's shoulder blade, but even the slightest surge of his chakra would attract the attention of the Konoha guards and the Hokage's regular bodyguards. He didn't really want to explain things to them. Besides, Namikaze had plenty of enemies even in his own village, and they certainly couldn't know that the boy was his biological son. For this simple reason, Minato tried to find the child without resorting to shinobi arts. Naruto ran out of the small shop, utterly satisfied and happy, clutching something suspiciously resembling a piece of sausage. Pausing for a moment, and not noticing anything unusual, the boy shrugged and continued on his way. The evening was slowly coming into its own, The sky was growing darker, and the sun had long since turned crimson, barely visible over the horizon. It would seem that the small child should have been home and asleep by now, but this was Naruto, and when did Naruto ever do anything like other kids? After running a few more meters, the blonde stopped at a long trimmed bush and began rapidly crumbling sausage in his hands, whispering something like an animal's call under his breath. After a short while, the bushes finally began to move, and from them emerged a dirty, shabby puppy. The little ball of fur was clearly several weeks old. It was so tiny. Naruto smiled happily, watching the little dog greedily swallow pieces of liverwurst and lap up milk from a cracked plastic lid. But as they say, everything must come to an end. The stray dog's small dinner had finally come to an end. The feeling of a full stomach made the little dog visibly cheerier and, in gratitude, began licking his benefactor's hands, barking awkwardly and comically. Naruto laughed happily at such a display of genuine affection. "There you are!" The four sighed with relief, placing his hand on his son's shoulder, startling the hell out of him. Minato had already given up on any possible enemies and had already cast instant teleportation hand seals when he heard an all too familiar laugh coming from somewhere in the nearby bushes. The source of the sound turned out to be his missing son enthusiastically playing with. "What is that, a puppy?" "Don't scare me like that again," Naruto muttered reproachfully, then softened. "Look at this fluffy little miracle I found. Should we take him?" Hope and pleading appeared in his childish blue eyes. "Well," Minato hesitated, unsure of what to say. He knew perfectly well that Kushina would be against having a dog in their home. If it had been a cat, that would have been fine, but a dog. However, he couldn't refuse Naruto. The boy had been through enough in the past, and if his dreams were to be shattered now. "Fine, take your miracle. We'll somehow persuade the bloody habanero." Please leave your reviews. Chapter 12 What is this? The bloody habanero asked sternly, looking at her son, who was beaming with joy and holding something alive in his hands, standing on the threshold of her house. A dog, the fourth said, spreading his hands and smiling innocently. Naruto also made a puzzled face, and the puppy, the cause of all the trouble, barked happily. "I see it's not a crocodile," Kushina sighed wearily, rubbing her forehead with her hand. "Why did you let Naruto drag it into the house?" The question, of course, was aimed at Minato. He only shrugged nonchalantly. "What's the big deal? Our house is big, and one hairball won't make the space any smaller." "His name is Snowball," Naruto said out of place, soothingly stroking the snow-white lump. "I agree," Kushina continued, ignoring her son's remark. "But what if this snowball grows into a huge snowdrift in a couple of months?" "What then?" "I don't know," Fourth admitted honestly, earning a disapproving nod from his wife. "Well, we could build him a doghouse. He'll guard the house. My protective barriers are perfectly capable of handling this duty," Kushina grumbled, but the notes of discontent had finally subsided. It was a sure sign that a few more arguments and the unwavering mistress of the bloody seas would give in. Well, she couldn't argue with Minato for long. She loved him too much. What could she do? "Besides," Fourth continued his arguments in favor of having a dog in the house, "Naruto will never be bored. He'll always be able to run around and fool around with his new friend. And besides, you can't leave a defenseless bundle of joy out on the street, completely alone, without food or water, at the mercy of all sorts of scavengers. Don't embellish things," Kushina exclaimed discontentedly, even starting to feel sorry for Snezhawk. "No one will make fun of him. Not like you are making fun of me now." Now that was a serious argument in Kushina's favor. If she thought her nerves were being tested, nothing and no one would convince her otherwise. And then the would-be chatterboxes would have to hope for a miracle. Seeing his wife's mood plummet from "almost calm down" to "one more word and you're dead," Namikaze couldn't think of anything better than to feign resignation, snatch the puppy from his son's clutches, and turn him toward the street. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, and Kushina, distraught by such a quick victory, lost all desire to chase the fur ball out of the house. "You're taking advantage of my kindness, Namikaze!" she shouted after her husband, crossing her arms in an offended manner, then turned to Naruto. "You better come up with a better nickname for him than Snowball. And one more thing, if you run off somewhere without warning again, I won't answer for myself, understand?" Habanero said the last part of the sentence rather threateningly, demonstratively raising her fist almost to her son's nose. He swallowed nervously and quietly squeaked, confirming his agreement with a convulsive nod. Kushina, apparently satisfied with this answer, headed upstairs, saying as she went, "Food is on the table. Let's go!" "You've given us permission." Minato commented mischievously on his wife's actions, handing the ill-fated puppy to his son. "What are you going to name it now?" "I don't even know." Naruto placed the soft bundle on the floor. The puppy squealed happily and began playing with his young owner's shoelaces. "He's so small." The boy gazed with affection at the fluffy wonder, which, standing on all fours, reached 30 centimeters from the floor. "Kurama, baby! That's what I'll call him," Naruto told his father with a wide grin, to which Minato grinned but didn't object. First of all, having fed Kurama and built something like a little house mat for him, father and son finally had dinner and, terribly tired, wandered off to bed, since work and school were still on. Naruto woke up in the middle of the night, unable to figure out what or who had awakened him from his sweet dreams. After several futile attempts to discern anything, fatigue took its toll, and the boy fell back onto his pillow, cherishing the dream of once again plunging into the realm of Morphus. A quiet whining and grinding sound came from somewhere nearby. Fatigue screamed at me to try to sleep, while curiosity insisted on finding the source of the sound. What do you think, one? The answer is obvious. Overcoming the urge to forget about it all and lie down to sleep, Naruto climbed out of bed and looked around. His eyes had already adjusted to the dim light, and the outlines of the table, chairs, closet, and bed were now clearly visible. Speaking of the bed, the strange noise was coming from underneath it. Taking a flashlight from the nightstand, he was too lazy to turn on the light in the room. The blond boy shone it under the bed and nearly screamed. Two glowing blue eyes were staring at him from the darkness. It was night in Konoha, and all the inhabitants of the leafy village were sleeping peacefully. The only exception were the A and BU patrols, who kept Konoha safe during the hours of darkness. At the Uchiha clan's estate, too, all was quiet, but only at first glance. Somewhere near the entrance to the village streets, a small figure flitted by, panting softly. Sasuke Uchiha, for it was he, had recently made it a habit to crawl out of his warm bed in the middle of the night and sneak out the window, quietly and carefully, so as not to be noticed by his parents, to go train. "Exo!" The boy hissed through his teeth as another shuriken hit the hard wood, missing the target just slightly. Throwing stars had always been a big problem for Sasuke, and it was unclear why. He never missed with kunai. To be honest, the young Uchiha shouldn't have been bothered by this fact of his imperfection. Girls from the academy and elsewhere followed him around, sometimes not even giving him a chance to breathe. His teachers praised the boy unceasingly. How could they not? After all, Sasuke was the top student at the Shinobi Academy in academics. The boys always respected him, too, though they disliked him because all the fairer sex focused their attention solely on Sasuke, and his parents were very proud of their youngest son. So what's the matter? What's driving him to exhaust himself with middle-of-the-night training when he's already ahead in everything? The answer to this question was very simple. There was one person in the world whose admiration and recognition the young genius of the clan desired more than anything else. Uchiha Itachi, Sasuke's older brother, and the best shinobi of the Uchiha clan, despite his relatively young age. Itachi was only 16, but he was already the captain of a special forces unit of ANBU. "I will definitely surpass you, Brother Itachi," the boy whispered into the darkness, catching his breath slightly, finishing throwing the stars, and moving on to hand-to-hand combat training. Kurama, having found his owner after wandering around the house for a long time, whined happily and crawled out from under the bed, nuzzling his furry muzzle into the boy's lap. The boy sighed with relief. "You really gave me a scare, my friend. Can you imagine what would have happened if I'd screamed and the fourth and Aunt Kushina had burst into the room?" The puppy didn't answer, he just made scared eyes. "Yeah, better not imagine that." Naruto chuckled softly and stroked Kurama's fluffy fur. "Hey, you still smell like shampoo." The boy buried his nose in the snow-white fur, inhaling the pleasant scent of strawberries. "You can sleep next to the bed, on the rug. I can't take you with me. If Aunt Kushina finds you under my blanket in the morning, it'll be bad for both of us." Naruto spread his hands in an apologetic gesture. Surprisingly, Kurama did not show any persistence and obediently lay down on the shaggy rug next to his little master's bed. Please leave your reviews. Chapter 13 Came back immediately and finished his breakfast. Who did I tell? The angry cry of the bloody habanero could probably be heard throughout Konoha. The residents peered anxiously out of their windows, but upon realizing who was shouting, they immediately calmed down and continued getting ready for work, school, and elsewhere. After all, this kind of morning had become a regular occurrence for the Konoha residents over the past 2 years. It was just that this time, the fourth's wife had broken her decibel record, and everyone was surprised. "I'm late!" Ignoring his mother's disgruntled cries, Naruto grabbed a sandwich bag in his teeth, jumped out the window, and ran full speed to the academy. Of course, today was an incredibly important day for him. Final exams, and the end of the school routine, which included lectures from Irika-sensei, which were more drowsy than any lullaby. "Hey! Naruto!" Kushina still hoped to get her unruly son back and seated at the table, but seeing his red jacket flash 100 meters from the house, she finally resigned herself to defeat. "He never listens anyway. That's just it." Kurama, wanting to cheer up his mistress, nuzzled her hand with his wet nose. The woman instinctively stroked the pet's snow-white fur and, mentally wishing her son good luck on his exams, turned to the stove. Today, she intended to throw some sort of celebration for Naruto Academy's graduation, which meant there would be plenty of sweets on the table, including delicious, and most importantly, healthy, homemade ramen, a special recipe passed down to Kushina by her late mother. "Well, finally. I thought you chickened out and decided to skip today's exams." Ino couldn't resist a taunt, noticing a tousled blonde head in the doorway of their classroom. "You'll never get one," Naruto retorted, pulling back his eyelid and sticking out his tongue. "Has Sensei announced anything yet?" The boy quickly sat down at his desk. He was late, after all, and was now trying to catch his breath, which had been ragged from running so hard. "Nope, Irika, the teacher hasn't come into the classroom yet." "You're lucky." Ino phlegmatically examined her manicure, then perked up and whispered conspiratorially. "Hey, did you get the information about the teams from your dad?" "No." Naruto's gaze darkened slightly, and notes of great resentment appeared in his voice. "Only the best hypnotists could get him to talk about this topic, and with truth serum, and that's not a fact." Sigh. The young Yamanaka sighed heavily, once again conjuring up all the possible scenarios in her head. However, she couldn't continue this prediction for long. Irika-sensei entered the classroom and announced the start of the final exam. The class immediately stopped buzzing and pricked up their ears, hanging on the teacher's every word. Whatever one may say, this was an important day in the life of every graduate, and no one wanted to repeat a year. I imagine you're wondering what's happened to our heroes over the past 3 years. For that simple reason, I'll backtrack a bit. Flashback. Naruto ran home after finishing classes at the academy, grabbed a quick bite to eat, changed, and, calling Kurama to follow him, left the house as quickly as he'd entered. Kushina didn't even have time to complain. "You're late." Ino pointed a reproachful finger at the boy's chest as she met the blonde at the gates of her clan's estate, after a large-scale shopping trip and a couple of days at neighboring desks. The two had become close friends and often played together. "Just for a minute." Naruto tried to justify himself, making puppy dog eyes and putting on an innocent smile. "You're still late." Yamanaka disagreed, though not quite as sharply. "So where are we going?" "I only have 2 hours. My mother urgently needed to replant all the flowers in our shop, and she absolutely couldn't manage without my help." Ino rolled her eyes in irritation. "Yeah, no one wants to work, especially at such a young age. Especially after school. I was thinking of going to the river. Kiba said that the water had already warmed up to a normal temperature." Naruto thoughtfully rubbed his chin and turned his gaze to his friend, waiting for her decision. "Okay," the blonde said without making him wait. "I'll just go get my swimsuit and towel." The girl's long hair whipped Naruto's cheek, and its owner had already disappeared into the house. 5 minutes later, she ran out again, this time ready to go. Later, Naruto would long remember this day with horror and shudder, despite the fact that after the event on the river, much changed in the boy's life. It all started when he and Ino had a bet over who could swim the longest against the current without using chakra. The bet itself was silly, as the water was still cool, even though the kids were only too happy to escape the summer heat. Ordering Kurama to sit on the bank and, for good measure, tying him to a tree, Naruto and Ino entered the water. They were good enough swimmers that they didn't even think about such a trivial matter as warming up. Setting out to swim against what was, admittedly, a fairly strong current, the friends struggled to outpace each other, ignoring their rapidly ebbing strength. At first, everything went well. Naruto and Ino were keeping equal distance from the intended finish line. However, the four-son soon felt a slight tingling in his right thigh, but his thirst for victory stronger than his common sense, he ignored it. Too bad. After a few meters, when Naruto and Ino reached the absolute depths of the river, the slight tingling gave way to a raging pain, twisting his leg and driving him mad. His balance was instantly lost, and Naruto, with a silent scream, sank headfirst into the water, not even having time to take a breath. Ino, caught up in her desire to win the bet, didn't notice her companion falling behind, so she kept swimming until she heard Kurama's piercing bark. The dog seemed to be going berserk. He whined, barked frantically, reared up on his hind legs, and tried in every way to break free from his leash. Confused, Ino turned around and, not seeing Uzumaki behind her, was genuinely frightened. The current here was strong, and the depth was 3 or 4 meters, unsafe for a 9-year-old. But the worst thing was the river's little secret, which, alas, not everyone knew. Somewhere in the middle, the current forked. One path led onward, calmly and without any surprises. The other, however, circled around and, reaching a small, rugged cliff, passed through a series of turbulent waterfalls. Why small waterfalls? It wasn't as dangerous as a real waterfall because the height wasn't great, but this water path was perfect for extreme kayaking. There were too many underwater rocks and snags, which, if you got caught, would definitely kill you. If Naruto had swallowed water and passed out, there was a good chance the current had carried him back a few meters, right up to the fork. If so, there might be one less blonde on Earth. Ino understood this perfectly well, so she hurried to the shore. That way she had a better chance of catching up with her lost friend. Naruto woke up in Konoha's Central Hospital. Opening his eyes, he saw Minato, Kushina, Kurama, and, apparently, his attending physician looming over him. Ino, though she had begged to stay, was sent to her parents by the Namikazes, who were in severe shock and couldn't afford to worry. The doctor, overjoyed, hurried out of the room, leaving the young patient alone with his parents. Then Naruto, fearing the brainwashing was about to begin, quickly apologized and, without realizing it, called Minato and Kushina Mom and Daddy. The Namakazes exchanged glances and nodded. A couple of days later, when Naruto was discharged from the hospital, Minato and Kushina officially adopted Naruto. They, of course, knew the child was already their biological son. They even managed to convince Naruto of this, without confusing the little one with various crossings between worlds. So, after the incident at the river, the boy was probably the happiest man on the planet. Of course, his parents were found. They might not have admitted it right away, but still. Yes. But the brainwashing and the long lectures with all their consequences still took place. Naruto was even placed under house arrest to discourage him from risking his life again. After the boy officially became the fourth Hokage's son, the villagers' attitude toward him changed somewhat. Almost everyone smiled politely at him as he ran through the streets. His classmates began to respect him more. The female half of the class split into two fan clubs: the genius of the Uchiha clan and the son of the fourth. In short, life took on a new meaning. It wasn't that anyone had been hostile to him before. No, well, not in this world. It was just that he was getting a little more attention now. This sometimes even angered Naruto, especially if people's feelings were feigned, somehow, but the boy easily distinguished the false from the real. He and Ino remained friends, and they continued to run around Konoha together after school. Naruto still liked Haruno Sakura and never gave up hope of winning the pink-haired girl's heart, while she, in turn, never took her adoring gaze off Sasuke. Ino continued to compete with Lobasta for the Uchiha, but this time out of purely feminine spite and an unwillingness to lose. Naruto and Sasuke themselves never developed a friendly relationship. They were constantly arguing. Always and for any reason. They often fought and simply competed in everything and everyone. In this atmosphere, another 2 years flew by. The academy students turned 11 or 12, meaning they had very little time left to study. Final exams were approaching with the Third Cosmic War, and the future Genin spent their final weeks of school life in rigorous and grueling training. No one wanted to lose face. End flashback. So let's begin the final exam. Yumino Irika addressed his students loudly. It consists of 4 stages. 1. Transformation technique. 2. Cloning technique. 3. Throwing kunai and shuriken. 4. Sparring. Each stage is held on a separate day, and the results will be announced immediately. On-site, in short. Upon successful completion of all stages, you will receive Konoha forehead protectors, after which teams of 3 Genin will be assigned. Anyone who fails at least one stage will be held back a year. I wish you all the best of luck. The teacher stepped away from the microphone, gesturing for the graduates to proceed to the adjacent classroom, where the first stage of the exam was to be held. Please leave your feedback. Chapter 14 As you all already know, I believe the final exam will be conducted in 4 stages. 1. Transformation technique. 2. Cloning technique. 3. Throwing kunai and shurikens. 4. Sparring. Upon successful completion of all stages, you will be awarded forehead protectors with the Konoha symbol and the title of Genin. Afterward, I will announce the list of teams, each consisting of 3 graduates and a personal mentor for each team. I wish you all the best in your exams, as anyone who fails even one stage will be held back a year. After the teacher's speech, a buzz rippled through the classroom as the graduates shared their impressions, worries, and hopes. But all good things must come to an end, and now 2 more examiner teachers appeared at the threshold of the auditorium. Along with Yumino Irika, they invited the students into the adjacent classroom, a more spacious and less stuffy one, to take the first stage, the transformation technique. Stage 1 for the title of Genin. Naturally, the entire crowd of graduates wasn't allowed into the auditorium. They were asked to line up and enter the classroom one at a time. Some were happy about this, others were disappointed. Be that as it may, the classmates eventually found common ground and lined up at the door in an almost perfectly straight line. Naruto, Ino, Sasuke, and Sakura found themselves next to each other in this lively line, and so they merrily sparred with each other. And exclusively, Sakura versus Ino, and Sasuke versus Naruto. The boys didn't get involved in the girls' squabbles, just as the girls didn't get involved in the boys' battlefield. Just when the rest of the graduates had lost their patience and were about to show this quartet, where the crayfish were, their homeroom teacher and one of the